After Grandpa's funeral, I hid the fact that he left me $22 million. A week later, my attorney opened his sealed file, and the truth about my parents' plan made their entire family meeting collapse. The certified envelope slid under my apartment door at 9:16 on a Tuesday morning, scraping across the cold tile beside my coffee mug. It was thick. It was addressed to me. And it said my grandfather had died 6 weeks earlier at a funeral my parents never told me about. For a moment, I did not reach for it. Outside my kitchen window, gray snowmelt ran in narrow streams through the parking lot. A delivery truck groaned somewhere beyond the building. My coffee had been sitting beside my laptop for 43 minutes, cold enough that a thin skin had formed across the surface. The envelope rested beside it with one corner bent from the door. I looked at the return address. Kincaid, Voss and Mercer. Attorneys at law. My hands stayed flat against the table. My name is Maren Dalloway. I am 36 years old, and I have spent 11 years practicing probate and trust law in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I draft wills. I review trust instruments. I explain to families, usually at the worst moment of their lives, that a document is not a suggestion just because someone dislikes what it says. I knew what a certified letter from a firm like Kincaid, Voss, and Mercer meant. I also knew what it did not mean. It did not mean my parents had remembered me. I picked up the envelope carefully. The paper was cold from the Michigan morning. Its edges were stiff, and the ink smelled sharp beneath the stale coffee and the lemon cleaner my building manager used in the hallway. Across the front, a printed label read, "Signature required." That made me look toward the small security monitor mounted above the counter. My building had cameras in the corridor because the owner had dealt with package thefts the previous winter. I opened the app on my laptop, entered the time range, and watched the footage. At 9:14, a postal carrier stopped outside my door. At 9:15, he knocked once. At 9:16, after no one answered because I had noise-canceling headphones on while reviewing a client's estate tax worksheet, he slid the envelope beneath the door and walked away. I replayed it twice. Then I opened the letter. There were 3 pages inside. The first page was signed by Rowan Kincaid, senior partner at Kincaid, Voss and Mercer. I knew his name. Anyone who worked in estate planning across western Michigan knew his name. Rowan Kincaid had handled family trusts for developers, hospital founders, and people who owned more lakefront property than most towns had public sidewalks. The first sentence was clean and direct. I had been named primary beneficiary of the Gideon Renford estate. I read it once. Then I read it again. Gideon Renford was my grandfather. He had died 6 weeks earlier. The phrase was written halfway down the page, stated in the same careful legal language used to describe asset transfers and fiduciary responsibilities. Following the death of Gideon Renford on March 9th, I stared at the date until the numbers blurred slightly at the edges. March 9th had been a Sunday. 6 weeks earlier. I thought about the last time I had spoken to my mother, Corinne. It had been 3 weeks ago. She had called while I was leaving court after a guardianship hearing. She asked whether I was still working too much. I told her I had a client meeting. She said, "You always have a client meeting, Maren. That is why you never know what is happening in this family." Then she ended the call. At the time, I had assumed she meant Soren's latest business problem or some argument with my Aunt Mireya. Now I understood that my grandfather had already been dead. There had been a funeral. There had been flowers, calls, meals, condolences, maybe even photographs. And my parents had decided I did not need to know. I moved to the second page. That was where the number appeared. $22,760,400. The estate was divided into categories. $18,400,000 in liquid trust assets and investment accounts. $4,300,000 in commercial holdings. Additional personal property subject to a separate inventory and distribution schedule. The wording was not vague. The wording was not provisional. It did not say potential beneficiary. It did not say contingent interest. It did not say shared distribution pending review. It said primary beneficiary. It said sole controlling trustee of the Renford Commercial Holdings Trust. It said I was required to meet with Rowan Kincaid within 10 business days. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the refrigerator motor click on behind me. My mother had always believed silence was an answer she could use against people. When I was younger, she would say something cruel and wait for me to argue. If I did not, she would smile as though she had won. "You never defend yourself," she used to tell me. That morning, I finally understood why she liked that so much. She thought quiet people were easier to move. I read the final paragraph. It stated that Gideon had made amendments to his estate plan in 2021. It stated that the firm had retained supporting documentation, sealed instructions, and independent records related to his capacity and intent. Sealed instructions. Independent records. I placed the letter beside my cold coffee. Then I opened the leather notebook I kept for client matters and wrote down the exact time. Tuesday, 9:16 in the morning. Certified notice received. Grandfather deceased. Funeral withheld. Primary beneficiary confirmed. $22,760,400. I did not call my parents. I did not send a message. I did not ask why they had left me outside the door while they handled my grandfather's death like it was family business and I was not family. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Rowan Kincaid's office. His assistant answered on the second ring. "Kincaid, Voss and Mercer. This is Lydia." "My name is Maren Dalloway," I said. "I received Mr. Kincaid's letter regarding Gideon Renford." There was a brief pause. Then her voice lowered. "Mr. Kincaid has been expecting your call." I looked at the letter again. At the number. At the date of my grandfather's death. "Tell him Thursday morning works," I said. Then I ended the call. Because before I spoke to my parents, I needed to know exactly what Gideon had left behind. And why Rowan Kincaid had sealed part of it. 6 weeks earlier, a woman named Patricia Lowell called me at 6:42 on a Wednesday evening. I knew Patricia because she had lived 3 houses down from my grandfather for nearly 30 years. She was 74, retired from the county library system, and had the careful voice of someone who believed information should be handled properly. "Maren," she said, "I hope I am not overstepping, but I saw Gideon's obituary this afternoon. I was standing in the parking garage beneath the Kent County Courthouse, holding my briefcase in one hand and my car keys in the other. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her." "You saw what?" "The obituary. In the Grand Rapids Press." Her voice softened. "It said the funeral was last Saturday. I assumed you were there." The concrete garage smelled like wet salt and exhaust. A car door slammed 2 levels below me. I looked through the open side of the structure, where the March sky had gone the dull color of old aluminum. "What date did you say?" "Saturday, March 15th. "I am so sorry, dear." I thanked her because that was what I had been taught to do when someone gave me bad news. Then I got into my car, placed my briefcase on the passenger seat, and opened my laptop before I started the engine. The obituary appeared on the second search result. Gideon Renford. Born August 12, 1943. Died March 9, 2026. I read every line. My grandfather had been described as a businessman, a mentor, and a devoted family man. The obituary listed his children, including my mother, Corinne Dalloway. It listed Blaine, my father, as a son-in-law. It listed Soren by name. It listed cousins I had not spoken to since college. It listed my Aunt Mireya and her husband, Hollis. It did not list me. The omission had been deliberate. Obituaries are not generated by accident. Someone gives the funeral home a list. Someone reviews the draft. Someone approves the names. I took a screenshot at 6:47 p.m. Then I drove to my parents' house. Their home sat in East Grand Rapids on a quiet street where the driveways were wide, the lawns were professionally etched, and every porch had a decorative wreath that changed with the season. My mother had replaced the front door 3 years earlier because the old one did not photograph well in holiday pictures. Their new door was painted deep navy blue. I parked at the edge of the stone driveway and saw Soren's black SUV near the garage. I also saw two other cars I recognized from family gatherings. There were lights on in the dining room. Through the narrow gap beside the curtains, I could make out the gold reflection of the chandelier. Someone was setting plates on the table. I walked up the front steps and rang the bell. The sound carried through the house, one clear chime followed by another. I heard footsteps. Then the lock turned halfway. My mother opened the door only 4 inches. She was wearing a cream cardigan and pearl earrings. Her hair had been styled, not casually pinned back. Behind her, I caught the smell of roasted chicken, rosemary, and the lemon candles she always lit when she expected guests. "Marin," she said, "you did not tell me Grandpa died." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door. "We have had a very difficult week. The funeral was 4 days ago." "Yes." Her eyes moved past me toward the driveway, as though she was checking whether I had brought someone with me. "And the service is over now." I kept my hands at my sides. Why was I not told? Corinne exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. It was a gesture I had watched her use for years before she said something she wanted to sound reasonable. "You were not invited for a reason, Marin. Please stop making this harder than it needs to be." The sentence landed with more force because she said it quietly. I looked past her shoulder. My father was standing near the dining room entrance. Blaine had one hand resting against the wall, his face arranged into the expression he used when he expected someone else to handle an uncomfortable conversation. He walked closer. "Marin, this is not the time," he said. "It seems like exactly the time." His mouth tightened. "Family matters are being handled." There were people eating dinner inside. I could hear the small sounds of silverware against china. Someone laughed once, then stopped. I saw the corner of Soren's shoulder beyond the hallway. He was seated at the dining table, close enough to hear every word, but he did not stand up. That was when I understood the shape of it. They had not forgotten to call me. They had decided I should not be there. Not at the funeral. Not at the reception. Not at whatever private conversation they were having over chicken and wine in the house where I had grown up. My mother shifted her weight, preparing to close the door. "Marin," she said, "please do not turn this into another one of your legal arguments." I looked at her cardigan. I noticed a faint line of flour near her cuff. I noticed the polished brass handle under her hand. I noticed that the door had already been opened only far enough to keep me outside. Then I said, "I understand." My father glanced at my mother. For the first time that evening, neither of them seemed prepared for my answer. I did not knock a second time. People who do not want you to see what they are doing usually open the door themselves once they believe you have nothing left to push back with. I walked to my car through the cold wind. The snowbanks along the driveway had turned gray at the edges. My shoes clicked against the stone. Behind me, the door shut with a soft, expensive sound. At home, I printed the obituary. The page came out warm from the printer. Gideon's name sat beneath a black border. Beneath it was the list of survivors, neat and complete except for the one name that should have been there. Mine. I placed the printed obituary inside a folder. Then I added the screenshot, the call log from Patricia Lowell, and a page from my leather notebook. March 19, 2026. 6:42 p.m. Patricia Lowell called. 6:47 p.m. obituary screenshot saved. 7:31 p.m. parents confirmed funeral had occurred. 7:34 p.m. denied entry to family home. I labeled the folder, Gideon Renford. Then I set it in the top drawer of my desk. 6 weeks later, Rowan Kincaid's letter arrived. And I learned my parents had kept more than a funeral from me. Gideon Renford was not a man who made people guess whether he had noticed them. He did not say much when he was pleased. He did not perform affection in front of other people. He did not post photographs, make speeches, or turn birthdays into public evidence of love. He simply arrived. When I graduated from law school, Gideon drove 4 hours from Holland to Ann Arbor in a dark blue sedan that was already 12 years old. He wore the same charcoal suit he had worn to every important event in my life since I was 13. The jacket was slightly too broad in the shoulders. One cuff button had been replaced with a plain black one. He sat through the entire ceremony without checking his phone. Afterward, when everyone else was taking pictures in clusters and asking where we should go for dinner, he handed me a narrow envelope. Inside was a card with no decoration except a gold border. Marin, you chose a profession where words can move property, protect people, and expose cowards. Read every page before you sign anything. Grandpa Gideon. 3 sentences. That was his style. He never sent birthday texts. He mailed cards with stamps. He wrote in dark blue ink. He asked questions that required more than one-word answers, and he waited through the silence while you decided whether you were going to answer honestly. How is work, really? Do you sleep enough? What do you think your mother is afraid of? The last question had come during a lunch at a diner in Holland when I was 28. I remember the cracked red vinyl booth, the smell of fried onions, and the fact that Gideon did not touch his coffee until it was almost cold. I had looked down at my plate. I do not know, I said. He nodded as if that answer was useful. You will, he said. I thought about that conversation often after he died, especially after I learned that my parents had made certain I was absent from his funeral. The year Gideon moved into senior residence, my mother became very busy. The facility set near the lake outside Holland, a low brick building with wide windows, pale hallways, and a lobby that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and steamed vegetables. The staff called it Lakeshore Haven. My mother called it the best place available, usually when someone was listening. Corinne handled the move. She selected the apartment. She coordinated the paperwork. She placed herself on the emergency contact form. She asked who would have access to medical updates, who could speak with administrators, and who would be notified if Gideon's condition changed. Then she posted photographs online. In one, she stood beside Gideon near the entrance, her arm tucked through his elbow, both of them facing the camera. In another, my father carried a box marked books, while my mother pointed toward the hallway as if she were directing a renovation project. The caption said, "Taking care of the people who took care of us." My father was easy to spot in every picture. Blaine had a habit of placing himself at the center of photographs without appearing to do so. He would hold the largest box. He would stand closest to the person being celebrated. He would tilt his body toward the camera before anyone else noticed one had been raised. I saw the posts during a lunch break at my office. I did not comment. I did not call. 3 days later, I drove to Gideon's old house. It was late October, and the trees along his street had started dropping wet leaves onto the curb. His house had been mostly cleared, but his studies still held a few things that no one had decided were useful enough to remove. Nell Varden let me inside. Nell had worked for Gideon for 15 years. Officially, she had been his house manager. In practice, she was the person who knew where every document, spare key, medication list, and sweater had been placed. She met me in the hallway wearing a gray cardigan and soft-soled shoes. Your mother said the movers were coming back tomorrow, she told me. I will be finished before then. Nell studied my face for a moment. She was careful with people, but she was never vague. He keeps asking whether you have seen the new place. I have not. He does not like it. That answer did not surprise me. Gideon had spent 40 years buying and managing commercial property. He understood buildings in a practical way. He knew which rooms trapped cold, which windows leaked, which hallways made people feel like visitors in their own lives. A senior residence would have felt like someone else's floor plan. I walked into his study. The room smelled like old paper, cedar shelves, and the faint metallic scent of radiator heat. His desk stood beneath the window, cleared except for a brass lamp and an old compass resting beside a stack of maps. The lamp had a green glass shade. The compass was round, heavy, and scratched across its glass face. I picked it up. The brass casing was cold in my palm. The needle trembled once, then settled north. Nell watched from the doorway. Take both, she said. He will know where they came from. The drive to Lakeshore Haven took a little more than 2 hours. By the time I arrived, the sun had lowered over the lake, turning the water dull silver beyond the parking lot. Gideon was sitting in a reading chair near the window. His apartment looked clean and careful. Too careful. The walls were blank. The side table held a lamp he had never chosen. The curtains were beige. A faint smell of industrial laundry detergent hung in the air. He looked at the brass lamp first. Then he looked at me. "You found it." Nell knew where it was. She usually does. I set the lamp beside his chair, plugged it in, and switched it on. The green shade cast a warm circle across the table. Gideon watched the light settle over the room. "This place smells borrowed," he said. I looked around. "It does." That made one corner of his mouth move. We spent the next hour making small changes. I put the compass beside his maps. I arranged 3 framed photographs on the bookshelf. I moved his chess books from a moving box to the cabinet near his chair. Then I made tea with the electric kettle the facility had provided. We sat by the window and looked through one of his old county maps. He pointed to a narrow strip of land near Lake Michigan. "Bought that in 1989, he said. "Everyone thought I was wasting money." "Were you?" "I bought it for $70,000. Sold the surrounding parcels 15 years later for 9 times that." He tapped the map with one finger. People confuse noise with certainty. I knew he was not only talking about property. At one point, his phone lit up on the table. A notification from my mother's social media account appeared on the screen. She had posted another photograph from moving day. Gideon looked at it. Then he looked at the lamp beside his chair. "People tell you what they value by what they do when no one is taking pictures," he said. He did not say my parents were pretending. He did not need to. I did not tell Corinne or Blaine about that visit. I did not tell them about the tea, the maps, or the way Gideon kept the compass on the table beside him after I left. My parents treated care like a competition with an audience. I had no interest in entering. But Gideon had been watching longer than any of us understood. And somewhere in the years that followed, he had started keeping track. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, with rain sliding down the windows of my apartment in thin, uneven lines. I wore the navy suit I usually reserved for hearings where the other side had mistaken confidence for evidence. It was practical, fitted cleanly, and had enough inside pockets for a legal pad, my phone, and the folder I had started 6 weeks earlier when Patricia Lowell told me my grandfather had died. The folder was still thin. By the end of that morning, it would not be. Kincaid, Voss, and Mercer occupied the 18th floor of a stone and glass building in downtown Grand Rapids, across from a bank that had survived 3 mergers because no one in the city could agree on what to replace it with. The elevator opened into a quiet reception area with dark wood floors, framed aerial photographs of lakefront developments, and the faint smell of polished leather. A receptionist stood when I entered. "Ms. Dalloway, Mr. Kincaid is ready for you." Rowan Kincaid's conference room faced the Grand River. The water below was dark from the rain, moving steadily beneath the bridges. He stood near the window when I walked in, taller than I had expected, with silver hair cut close at the sides and a dark suit that looked expensive because it fit without trying to look expensive. "Marin," he said. "Thank you for coming in. Thank you for sending the letter." He nodded once, then motioned toward the chair across from him. On the table sat 3 things. A thick binder, a black document box, and a small wooden case with brass hinges. I sat down without touching any of them. Rowan opened the binder first. "Your grandfather retained this firm in 2018, he said. He updated his estate plan in 2021, then reaffirmed key provisions after an independent capacity review in 2024. His instructions were clear, and they were reviewed more than once." Was he competent when he made the amendments? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I watched his hands as he turned to the trust summary. Lawyers reveal confidence through rhythm. Someone uncertain will rearrange papers, soften verbs, or offer too much explanation before giving a direct answer. Rowan did none of that. "Gideon left you $18,400,000 in liquid trust assets and investment accounts," he said. "Those assets will transfer through the Renford Family Trust after final administrative steps are completed." He moved to the next section. The commercial holdings are valued at approximately $4,300,000. They are held through a separate entity trust. You are the sole controlling trustee. The numbers sat between us in black print. $22,760,400. I had known the number since Tuesday morning. Hearing it spoken aloud by the man responsible for administering the trust gave it a different weight. Not excitement. Responsibility. Are there any co-trustees? I asked. No. Any discretionary powers retained by another family member? No. Any pending liens, creditor claims, or undisclosed transfer restrictions? None that affect your authority. That was when I looked up. My parents had frozen me out of a funeral, stood behind a locked door while their guests ate dinner inside, and told me family matters were being handled. Meanwhile, Gideon had left me the legal authority to handle all of it. Rowan turned another page. Nell Varden has received a separate distribution, he said. A small cabin near Lake Michigan and a lifetime living allowance funded through a restricted support trust. I thought of Nell standing in Gideon's hallway, wearing a gray cardigan, telling me the movers were returning the next day. She earned that, I said. She did, Rowan replied. Your grandfather was specific about her. He paused before continuing. Your parents are each receiving $27,500. They will also receive sealed letters from Gideon. Those letters are personal and are not part of the estate record available to you. I wrote the number down. $27,500. For a man whose estate exceeded $22 million, it was not an oversight. It was a message delivered in arithmetic. I did not ask Rowan what the letters said. Some documents belong to the people who have to live with them. He reached for the black document box. This is the item Gideon instructed us to give you only after you had received notice of the inheritance. The brass latch clicked when he opened it. Inside was the compass from Gideon's study. For a second, the conference room disappeared beneath the memory of Lakeshore Haven. The borrowed smell of that apartment. The green glow of the lamp I had brought him. His hand flattening the old county map while he told me people confuse noise with certainty. The compass lay on black velvet beside a photograph. It was my law school graduation picture. Gideon stood next to me in his charcoal suit, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I had never seen this copy before. On the back, written in dark blue ink, were 5 words. She reads what people miss. My thumb rested against the edge of the photograph. Then Rowan lifted the final item from the box. A sealed file. The cover was heavy, cream-colored cardstock. A red wax seal held the flap closed. Across the front, typed in clean capital letters, were the words, Gideon Renford Estate File to be opened by Marin Dalloway. The seal had dried into a dark red ridge. Your grandfather prepared that file over several years, Rowan said. He asked that I explain the context before you open it. I sat back slightly. Please do. Your mother requested that Lakeshore Haven arrange a capacity assessment shortly after Gideon moved in. I looked at him. On what grounds? She cited concerns about cognitive decline and financial vulnerability. The phrase was familiar. I had seen it used in petitions, guardianship motions, and emergency filings. It could be necessary. It could also be weaponized by relatives who wanted access before the person at the center of the process understood what was happening. What did the assessment conclude? That Gideon had full decision-making capacity. The rain ticked softly against the window. Rowan continued. After that result, your mother asked administrative staff whether she could be added as the primary contact for financial and medical communications. Your father made separate inquiries about account authority. Gideon learned about both. From Nell. From multiple sources. Nell was one of them. I placed both hands on the table. Did he document it? Rowan's expression did not change. Your grandfather did not leave you a surprise, Marin. He left you a record. He slid the sealed file toward me. The paper felt thick beneath my fingertips. I broke the wax seal carefully, then lifted the flap. Inside were 63 pages divided by colored tabs. Facility communications. Financial access inquiries. Capacity evaluation. Personal affidavit. The first page carried Gideon's signature. His handwriting was shakier than it had been on my graduation card, but each letter was still clear. I had read hundreds of trust files. I had watched people prepare for death with documents that tried to prevent the living from rewriting their choices. But this was different. Gideon had built a legal fence around the last thing he still controlled: his own intent. I looked at Rowan. "I want complete copies of everything," I said. He nodded. "They are already being prepared." Outside, the river kept moving through the rain. Inside, I turned to the first tab. And I saw the date my mother started asking questions she had no right to ask. Rowan did not rush me through the file. That mattered. In probate work, people often think the important part is the final document. The will, the trust, the signature page with witnesses and a notary seal. Those things matter. But a strong estate plan is not one document. It is a timeline. It is consistency. It is every small decision that makes the final decision impossible to distort. Gideon understood that. Rowan and I read the 63 pages in chronological order. The first tab was marked Facility Communications. The earliest entry was dated October 18, 2021, 12 days after Gideon had moved into Lakeshore Haven. It was an internal email from Corinne to the facility administrator, copied to a care coordinator and a social worker. The email was polite on its surface. Corinne wrote that she wanted to streamline family communication because Gideon was adjusting to a new environment and too many calls from different relatives could be confusing. She asked that all non-emergency updates be routed through her first. She also asked whether my name could be removed from the default family notification list until the family had settled on a communication plan. I read that sentence twice. Then I placed the page flat on the conference table. "Was that request approved?" I asked. "No," Rowan said. The facility declined. They were willing to designate Corinne as an emergency contact, but they would not remove a competent resident's granddaughter from the notification list without his written instruction. Did Gideon know? He did within 48 hours. I looked at the date again. October 18, 2021. My grandfather had been in that facility less than 2 weeks when my mother started trying to control who received information about him. I kept reading. The next document was a contact log from the facility. Corinne had called 6 times over the following month. 4 calls were about medications, meal plans, and transportation. Those were the kind of calls a concerned daughter might make. The other 2 were different. One asked whether Gideon's legal counsel had access to his medical updates. The second asked whether the facility had procedures for limiting distressing family contact if a resident became emotionally vulnerable. I wanted to be fair to my parents. Fairness mattered to me because I had spent years working in rooms where people were reduced to their worst sentence, their worst decision, or their most inconvenient truth. Corinne had been involved in Gideon's care. She had coordinated the move. She had called the facility. She had made sure he had transportation to appointments. Those were real actions. But care does not need secrecy to survive. Care does not need to erase other people. Rowan turned to the next tab. Financial access inquiries. The first email came from Blaine. It had been sent to a senior relationship manager at Gideon's bank, with Corinne copied on the message. The tone was professional. Blaine knew how to sound professional when he needed something. He wrote that Gideon was having difficulty managing the volume of financial matters connected to his commercial holdings. He asked whether the bank had a procedure to transfer signing authority if Gideon becomes unable to manage his affairs. The phrase appeared in quotation marks in the printed copy. I read it aloud once. Becomes unable to manage his affairs. Rowan nodded. The bank did not provide account information. They referred him to the existing power of attorney documentation and advised that any change in authority would require Gideon's direct participation or a court order. Did Blaine follow up? He did. 3 times. The contact log showed dates, times, names, and call durations. November 4th, 2021. 11 minutes. November 12th, 2021. 6 minutes. November 19th, 2021. 9 minutes. Each entry ended the same way. No disclosure provided. No authority established. I made notes beside every date. Then Rowan opened the capacity evaluation. It was 18 pages long, printed on bright white paper with the faint chemical smell of fresh toner. The evaluator was Dr. Marius Bell, a geriatric psychiatrist with 22 years of clinical practice and a court appointment history in Kent and Ottawa counties. The report was dated December 3, 2021. Corinne had requested the evaluation. Gideon had agreed to it. That detail mattered. He had not avoided the examination. He had not hidden behind a lawyer. He had met with Dr. Bell alone for 90 minutes, completed cognitive testing, discussed his assets, named his relatives, described his current medications, and explained why he had recently changed legal representation. Dr. Bell's conclusion was clear. Gideon Renford demonstrated intact memory, judgment, financial awareness, and decision-making capacity. He understood the nature and approximate value of his estate. He understood the identity of his intended beneficiaries. He expressed his decisions consistently and without evidence of coercion. The final paragraph had been underlined in pencil. The line was neat but slightly uneven. Gideon's hand. I rested my finger on the edge of the paper. He knew they would try to use this against him, I said. Yes, Rowan replied. That is why he allowed the evaluation to happen. The next tab was labeled Personal Affidavit. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I reached for the bottle of water sitting near Rowan's chair and poured half a glass. The sound of water against glass was small and ordinary. It gave the room one quiet second before I turned the page. The affidavit had been notarized on December 9, 2021. Gideon's signature sat at the bottom of every page. The language was his. Direct. Specific. Not written to impress anyone. He described Corinne's requests to the facility. He described Blaine's questions about account authority. He stated that he was aware of their concerns and that he did not object to reasonable care. Then he wrote the sentence Rowan had marked with a small blue tab. Care is not control, and affection is not a power of attorney. I did not say anything. I kept reading. Gideon instructed Rowan to record every future attempt by my parents to contact Lakeshore Haven, his bank, or the law firm regarding his health, assets, or estate plan. He asked that all correspondence be preserved, cross-referenced, and added to the file. He had turned his own vulnerability into a documented record. Near the back of the facility tab, I found an internal note dated March 7, 2026. 2 days before he died. Corinne had called a care coordinator and asked whether I could be excluded from future family notifications due to ongoing conflict. The coordinator wrote that Gideon had not authorized such an exclusion. She also wrote that Corinne had sounded insistent and frustrated. I looked at the date. March 7th. Gideon died on March 9th. My parents did not forget to notify me. They had tried to make sure no one else did. At home that evening, I spread the copies across my dining table in date order. Facility records on the left. Bank inquiries in the center. Legal documents on the right. I made pasta because it was the only thing in my refrigerator that did not require thought. I ate it standing at the counter while the water boiled down in the pot. My phone lit up twice. Once from my mother. Once from my father. I let both calls ring. Then I opened my leather notebook and wrote one sentence beneath the March 7th facility note. They had been planning the silence long before they used it. 2 weeks after I met with Rowan Kincaid, my mother called at 10:18 on a Thursday morning. I was reviewing a proposed trust modification for a client whose adult sons had spent 3 months arguing over a lake house neither of them had visited in years. My phone vibrated beside my keyboard. Corinne's name appeared on the screen. I watched it ring twice before answering. Marin, she said, with the careful softness she used when she wanted something to sound reasonable. Your father and I thought it might be helpful if you came to dinner on Sunday. We need to talk through Grandpa's estate. I turned my chair toward the window. Below my office, traffic moved through downtown Grand Rapids in wet lines of brake lights. The sky had been raining since dawn, and the glass across from me showed a faint reflection of my own face. What time? I asked. There was a short silence. 6:30. That works. I could almost hear her recalculating. Good, she said. This should stay within the family. It will, I told her. Then I ended the call. They still did not know what I knew. They did not know about the capacity evaluation, the bank inquiries, the facility notes, or the notarized affidavit sitting in a locked drawer inside my apartment. They did not know Rowan had preserved every contact attempt Gideon had instructed him to preserve. They believed they had invited me to a conversation. What they had actually created was a record. Sunday evening, I arrived at 6:27. My parents' house looked exactly as it had 6 weeks earlier when I stood outside their navy blue front door and heard people eating dinner without me. The stone driveway was dry this time. The front windows glowed amber behind expensive curtains. A wreath of pale eucalyptus hung above the brass knocker because my mother had decided winter decor should look cleaner after January. Soren's black SUV was parked beside the garage. I stepped inside at 6:29. The dining room smelled of roasted garlic, red wine, and the vanilla candle my mother burned whenever she wanted the room to feel warmer than it was. The chandelier threw bright reflections across the polished table. For places had been set with the china that only came out when someone needed to be impressed. My father stood when I entered. "Marin," Blaine said. "Good of you to come. Thank you for inviting me." My mother kissed the air beside my cheek. "You look tired," she said. I had a full week. Soren was already seated across from my usual place. He wore a dark quarter-zip sweater and the watch he bought during the short period when his venture capital firm had looked successful from the outside. The business had failed 8 months earlier. His investors had pulled out. He had stopped mentioning the company by name, which was how I knew the debt had not gone away. He gave me a quick nod. "Hey." "Hi, Soren." Dinner began with small talk about weather, court backlogs, and a neighbor's kitchen renovation. My mother passed the potatoes. My father poured wine. I accepted half a glass and drank none of it. Then Blaine set his fork down. "We should probably start discussing the holdings," he said. He said it like an executor. I watched him glance at my mother before continuing. "Your grandfather had always intended to keep certain properties in the family. The warehouse units, the retail spaces, the lake parcels. We need to be smart about how those are managed." "We do," I said. He looked pleased with that answer. "The commercial portfolio alone could be worth far more if it is repositioned correctly," he continued. "There are tenant issues, maintenance costs, tax exposure. It is not something one person should take on without guidance." Corinne folded her napkin beside her plate. "Exactly. We need to keep everything together until we have a full picture. Grandpa spent his life building that portfolio. It would be a shame to let outsiders divide it." I looked at her. "Which properties are you referring to?" "The Michigan Lake parcels, for one," she said quickly. "And the old Grand Haven retail building. Your grandfather would have wanted us to preserve those." The Grand Haven building had been sold in 2017. The lake parcels had been restructured through a holding company before Gideon entered Lakeshore Haven. I knew that because Rowan had shown me the transfer schedule. I picked up my water glass and took a small sip. "Did he say that to you?" I asked. Curran's hand stopped near the salt cellar. "He talked about legacy all the time." That was not my question. Blaine leaned back in his chair. "Marin, nobody is trying to fight with you." "I am not fighting." The chandelier hummed faintly overhead. Soren cleared his throat. "The point is that there are ways to improve the portfolio," he said. "You could consolidate the assets, refinance certain holdings, maybe shift some of the capital into something more flexible." "I have been looking at commercial repositioning models." I turned toward him. "Which models?" He named 2 regional development firms, then used the phrase liquidity event 3 times in less than a minute. He talked about converting long-term leases, selling selected assets, and creating a private investment vehicle. He never asked what Gideon had actually left. He never asked whether there were restrictions. He spoke as though the money were already spread across the table between us. I let him keep talking. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is give people room to explain themselves. Confidence is often the first piece of evidence. After dinner, Corinne followed me into the driveway. The air had turned colder. Steam drifted from the storm drain near the curb. I could see my breath as I unlocked my car. Marin, she said. I hope you understand that your father and I carried the burden of Grandpa's care for years. I kept one hand on the car door. I understand you handled many visible parts of it. Her expression tightened. We did more than visible parts. We were there. We handled the appointments, the move, the calls. We protected him. From what? She looked toward the house. You always do this. You make everything sound suspicious. I am asking a question. Her voice lowered. Whatever happens during probate, do not complicate the process. Do not turn this into some personal issue because you feel left out. The sentence was so close to the one she had used when she barred me from the funeral that I almost admired the consistency. Almost. I looked at her face under the porch light. Who asked Lakeshore Haven to assess Grandpa's capacity before anyone told me he was sick? Her eyes changed first. Then her mouth. I have no idea what you are talking about. You do. I said I do not. I nodded once. Thank you. She stepped back. For what? I did not answer. I got into my car and drove 3 blocks to a coffee shop that stayed open until 9. I bought a black coffee I did not want, parked beneath a broken street lamp, and opened my legal pad. The blue ink pressed through 4 pages as I wrote. 6:41 p.m. Blaine described himself as managing commercial holdings. 6:47 p.m. Corinne referenced Grand Haven Retail Building, sold in 2017. 6:53 p.m. Soren proposed refinancing and private investment structure without reviewing trust terms. 7:29 p.m. Corinne stated parents carried the burden of Gideon's care. 7:31 p.m. Corinne denied capacity assessment request. When I finished, I set the pen down and watched vapor gather on the windshield. Then I called Rowan. He answered immediately. Marin? Begin the formal notification process, I said. There was no need to explain what that meant. Rowan's voice became very calm. I will have the notices prepared tomorrow morning. I ended the call and started the car. For 6 weeks, my parents had been handling family matters. Now the family would receive the paperwork. Rowan sent the notices at 8:03 the next morning. I know the time because I was sitting in his conference room when his paralegal brought in the final packets, each one sealed in a heavy cream envelope with the firm's watermark pressed faintly into the paper. The copier in the room next door ran in steady intervals, producing a mechanical hum that sounded almost calm. Nothing about the contents was calm. Each packet contained 29 pages. There was a formal beneficiary notification, a trust summary, a notice of administration, a statement of Blaine and Corinne's limited distributions, a schedule explaining the 21-day period for contest-related objections, along with the address where all counsel communications had to be directed. Rowan placed the last stack on the table. Everything is cross-referenced, he said. Every asset category, every fiduciary designation, every deadline. I picked up one of the copies. The binder clip was silver. The paper was thick enough that I could feel the watermark beneath my fingertips. My name appeared in 3 places on the first page. Primary beneficiary. Sole controlling trustee. Authorized representative for the Renford Commercial Holdings Trust. The words were not emotional. That was part of their usefulness. Are the originals staying here? I asked. Yes, Rowan said. The executed documents remain in the secured estate file. You will take certified copies when you need them, but nobody outside this firm handles originals. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. By 8:37, the first courier confirmation appeared on Rowan's screen. By 9:12, another. Blaine received his packet at 10:04. Corinne received hers at 10:06. Soren's was delivered to his apartment at 10:19. My phone began ringing at 10:23. Corinne called first. I watched her name appear, then disappear. I did not decline it. I did not answer it. I allowed the voicemail system to receive whatever she was prepared to say when she thought I was listening. At 10:27, she called again. At 10:31, my father called. At 10:34, Corinne called a third time. Let it ring. At 10:38, she called again. Let it ring. At 10:43, Blaine called from his office number. Let it ring. By 11:15, I had 7 voicemails. I listened to them in Rowan's conference room with my legal pad open beside me. The first message was from my mother. Her voice was high and quick, the way it became whenever she had lost control of the room before she had entered it. "Marin, call me immediately. There has obviously been some terrible misunderstanding." The second message contained no misunderstanding. "You had no right to do this without speaking to us first," she said. "Your grandfather was not in a position to make these decisions by himself." The third message came from Blaine. He did not raise his voice. That was never his style. He preferred sentences that sounded measured until you listened closely enough to hear the threat inside them. "You need to understand that people are going to ask questions," he said. "If you have influenced these documents in any way, it would be better to address that now." I wrote down the exact wording. 11:02 a.m. Blaine implied improper influence before reviewing a state record. Evidence does not need to be dramatic to matter. Often it arrives as a voicemail someone leaves because they think their anger gives them authority. At 11:47, an email from my father appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "You have ambushed this family." It was 612 words long. Blaine wrote that I had manipulated a private family loss into a legal ambush. He wrote that Gideon had been vulnerable, isolated, and increasingly dependent on selective visitors. He wrote that I must have manipulated the process because no reasonable person would believe Gideon intended to leave his estate structured this way. I read it once. Then I printed it. I saved the original message in a dedicated folder, exported it as a portable document file, and recorded the timestamp. 11:47 a.m. Allegation of manipulation. No factual support. Sent after formal notice. Then I placed the printed copy behind the March 7th facility note. The timeline was beginning to extend itself. Soren sent a text at 12:16. "Can we talk privately before this gets worse?" There was no accusation in the message. No demand. Just one sentence. I read it twice, then placed my phone face down. I was not ready to answer him. A private conversation was not the same as accountability. Sometimes it was only a quieter room where people hoped you would lower your guard. That afternoon, Corinne called Rowan's office. She demanded a meeting. She asked whether the notices could be paused. She asked whether the commercial trust could be placed under temporary family management. She asked whether I had signed anything before Gideon died. Rowan answered none of those questions directly. He told her, professionally and repeatedly, that all relevant information had been disclosed in the packet she had received. By 4:30, my mother had another plan. She called a family unity meeting. That was the phrase she used in a group message sent to me, Soren, Aunt Mireya, and Hollis. Family unity meeting. Hawthorne table. Private dining room. Saturday, 6 p.m. Mireya lived outside Fort Wayne, Indiana. She and Hollis had not visited Grand Rapids in almost a year. Yet by Friday morning, Corinne had confirmed that they were driving in to support the family. I did not need Rowan to explain what that meant. My mother wanted witnesses. Not neutral witnesses. Not people who had read the trust documents. She wanted relatives who would arrive with a version of events already prepared for them. I met Rowan at his office Friday afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the sidewalks were still slick and dark. He stood beside the conference table while I reviewed the copies I would take with me. "Do not bring the original file," he said. "I will not. Bring only certified copies of what you are prepared to disclose. I have organized them by category." I assumed you would. His expression shifted slightly. "They are not inviting you to negotiate, Marin. They're inviting you to surrender in a room with witnesses." I looked down at the documents. Facility correspondence. Capacity evaluation. Trust amendment. Contact ledger. "I do not need to win by speaking louder than they do," I said. "I only need the documents to be in the right place, at the right time, in front of the right people." Rowan nodded. "That is usually how the strongest cases are won." At home, I made 3 sets of copies. One for the table. One for Rowan. One for my own records. Then I placed the brass compass from Gideon's study in the inside pocket of my coat. Its metal casing was cool against my palm. The scratched glass caught the kitchen light, and the needle trembled briefly before pointing north. Saturday was less than 24 hours away. My mother believed she was assembling a room full of pressure. I was bringing a record. I arrived at Hawthorne Table at 5:58 on Saturday evening. The restaurant stood on a quiet corner in East Grand Rapids, inside a renovated brick building with black-framed windows and a brass sign near the entrance. It served expensive food in portions too small to require a knife, which made it exactly the kind of place my mother chose when she wanted a conversation to feel important. A host led me past the main dining room. The air smelled like butter, grilled meat, and red wine. Low music moved beneath the sound of glasses touching. At the back of the restaurant, behind a frosted glass door, was the private room my mother had reserved. Everyone was already there. My father sat at the far end of the long oak table. Corinne sat beside him, facing the door, with a leather folder resting near her plate. Soren was on her other side. Across from him sat Mireya and Hollis, who had driven from Indiana that morning. The only empty chair was at the opposite end of the table. Mine. That placement was not accidental. It gave everyone a clear view of me. I removed my coat and placed it over the back of the chair. The brass compass in my inside pocket pressed lightly against my ribs. "Thank you for coming," Corinne said. "You asked me to." Her smile held for half a second, then narrowed. A server came in with water. I waited until she had filled every glass and left the room before I opened my menu. It was a small delay. Nothing more. But I wanted to see who could tolerate silence. Hollis checked his watch. Blaine shifted his napkin. Corinne tapped one fingernail against the edge of her folder. Mireya lasted the longest. "This does not have to be hostile," she said. "We are all grieving." "That is true," I said. It was the only answer she received. My mother folded her hands. "The family needs to present a unified position," she said. "Grandpa's estate is complicated. There are major assets, business interests, property obligations, and possible tax consequences. We need to make decisions together." I looked at the menu. "What decisions?" Blaine leaned forward. "The responsible decisions," he said. "Nobody wins if this turns into a prolonged legal dispute. Lawyers get paid. Courts get involved. The value of the estate gets drained. Everyone loses." He used the phrase "everyone loses" the way people use a warning when they are really naming the outcome they fear for themselves. "I agree that litigation has costs," I said. His expression relaxed slightly. Hollis jumped in before Blaine could continue. "Exactly. A contest can take months, sometimes years. And undue influence cases can get ugly." He looked around the table as if he had been appointed legal authority by the shape of his own voice. "People start asking questions. They start looking at who had access, who visited, who was around Gideon when he was not himself." Soren stared at the linen tablecloth. My mother did not correct Hollis. Mireya reached across the table and touched the stem of her glass. "Marin, I know you have always been independent. We all admire that. But you need to remember what family means when things get difficult." I looked at her hand. Her wedding ring was turned inward, a habit she had whenever she wanted to sound compassionate without taking a position. "What does family mean here?" I asked. The room grew quiet. Mireya pulled her hand back. "It means we do not turn on each other over money." There it was. Not the funeral. Not the withheld calls. Not the facility note asking to remove my name from family notifications. Money. That was the subject they had gathered to discuss. Everything else had merely been the route they took to get there. Corinne opened the leather folder beside her plate. "Your grandfather was vulnerable, Marin," she said. "Everyone in this room knows you took advantage of that." The sentence settled over the table. I did not move my hands. Blaine looked down at his water. Hollis nodded once, too quickly. Mireya's mouth tightened, but she did not say Corinne was wrong. Soren still would not look at me. I had spent 2 weeks reading every document Gideon had left behind. I knew the exact date my mother tried to restrict my access to facility updates. I knew how many times my father contacted Gideon's bank. I knew the date Corinne asked whether I could be removed from future family notifications. They did not know any of that. They believed I was sitting in that chair because I had received a letter and panicked. I let them believe it for another minute. Corinne slid an 11-page document across the table. It stopped halfway between us. The cover page read, Temporary Estate Management Agreement. A yellow sticky note sat at the top right corner. Signed tonight. The paper was freshly printed. I could smell the ink from where I sat. The edges were perfectly straight, untouched by anyone except the people who had already decided I should sign it. I did not reach for it. What does this agreement do? I asked. Blaine answered first. It puts the estate under temporary family management while everything gets sorted out. Who is family management? Your mother and I. Soren would assist with the business side. And my role? Karen's voice became gentler. You would remain involved, of course. This is only until we have clarity. The answer was not in the document. It was in the way she said involved. A person can be involved in a decision without having the power to make it. I looked down at the agreement, but did not touch it. Who drafted this? Hollis sat back. It is a standard arrangement. That was not my question. His face went still. Blaine cleared his throat. A lawyer we consulted prepared it. Which lawyer? Corinne looked toward the frosted glass door. It does not matter. It mattered. Every document has a drafter. Every drafter has an instruction. Every instruction has a purpose. I folded my hands beside my water glass. Do you all want me to respond to this now? Corinne looked at Blaine. Blaine looked at Soren. Mireia lowered her eyes. Hollis gave a short nod, as if he had been waiting for permission to approve something. Yes, Corinne said. We do. I nodded once. Then I reached for the folder I had placed beneath my chair. The leather was dark brown. Gideon's name was written on the tab in clean black ink. I set it on the oak table. The sound was quiet. It was enough. My mother's eyes moved to the folder. What is that? She asked. I rested my palm on the cover. The reason I came. For a few seconds, nobody touched the food. The private room held the smell of butter, wine, and cooling steak. Beyond the frosted glass door, someone laughed in the main dining room. It sounded distant enough to belong to another building. My folder sat in the center of the oak table. Corinne looked at it as if it had appeared there on its own. What is that? She asked again. I opened the clasp. You asked for a family meeting, I said. I brought the family record. The first document I placed on the table was Rowan Kincaid's engagement letter. It was dated May 14, 2018. I turned it so everyone could read the letterhead. Kincaid, Voss and Mercer. Rowan Kincaid, senior partner. Gideon Renford, client. My father leaned forward, then stopped himself. This proves nothing, he said. It proves Gideon retained independent counsel years before he moved into Lakeshore Haven, I said. It also proves he had counsel before anyone in this family began discussing his capacity. Corinne's gaze moved to the page, then away from it. Hollis shifted in his chair. Lawyers can be influenced, he said. Especially when an elderly man is isolated. I placed the trust amendment beside the engagement letter. The amendment was dated October 29, 2021. Corinne became Gideon's emergency contact on October 6, 2021, I said. 23 days later, Gideon amended his estate plan through independent counsel. My mother gave a short, humorless laugh. So now you are claiming that every decision he made after moving into care was somehow about me? No, I said. I am showing the timeline. The difference mattered. I took out the independent capacity evaluation next. 18 pages. Dr. Marius Bell. December 3, 2021. The paper was bright beneath the restaurant lighting. The conclusion, underlined in Gideon's own pencil, rested near the center of the final page. I read only the relevant part. Gideon Renford demonstrates intact judgment, financial awareness, and decision-making capacity. He understands the nature and approximate value of his estate, the identity of his intended beneficiaries, and the consequences of his estate planning decisions. No one spoke. I placed the report beside the amendment. Corinne's fingers tightened around her napkin. That doctor saw him one time, she said. 90 minutes, I said. Alone. At Gideon's request. After you asked the facility to arrange the evaluation. Her face changed. Not much, but enough. Mireya noticed it too. Her eyes moved from my mother to the report, then back to me. Blaine pulled his chair closer to the table. Your mother was worried about him, he said. That is what families do. I agree, I said. Concern can be appropriate. Questions can be appropriate. Documentation becomes necessary when concern turns into an attempt to take control. Then I placed the facility access attempt ledger on the table. The document was 17 entries long. Every inquiry had a red date stamp. Every contact attempt had the time, the caller, the department reached, and the response recorded by either Lakeshore Haven, Gideon's bank, or Rowan's office. A silver binder clip had left a small dent in the upper corner. I slid it toward my father. November 4th, 2021. You asked Gideon's bank about transferring signing authority if he became unable to manage his affairs. Blaine looked down. November 12th. You called again. His hand did not move. November 19th. You called a third time. No authority was granted. No information was disclosed. I was trying to understand the options, he said. For whom? His jaw tightened. Corinne jumped in. Your father was trying to protect the family from a financial disaster. Gideon had no financial disaster, I said. He had a commercial portfolio, a trust structure, independent legal counsel, and a capacity report confirming he understood all of it. Hollis tapped a finger against the table. You keep presenting documents like they tell the entire story. They do not, I said. They tell the parts people tried to deny. I reached into the folder again. This time, I took out one page. It was an internal facility note dated March 7, 2026. 2 days before Gideon died. I placed it in front of Mireya. She had not said much since I opened the folder. Her expression had become careful, the way it did when she realized the room was moving somewhere she could no longer control. Would you read the highlighted section? I asked. Mireya looked at me first. Then she lowered her eyes. Her lips moved silently over the paragraph before she read aloud. Corinne Dalloway asked whether Marin Dalloway could be removed from future family notifications due to ongoing conflict. Facility staff advised that resident Gideon Renford had not authorized such an exclusion. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around us. Even Hollis stopped speaking. Mireya held the page in both hands. Corinne, she said, and there was no softness in her voice now. What is this? My mother did not answer immediately. Her eyes fixed on the document, then on me. You are taking that out of context. What context? I asked. You were always difficult with Grandpa. You questioned every decision. You made him upset. I watched her choose each sentence. It was the same pattern she had used at the front door after the funeral. Move the focus. Make my reaction the issue. Treat the absence of my name as a consequence I had earned. Blaine pushed his chair back. The wood scraped sharply against the floor. You are acting like a vicious little parasite, he said. You came here to humiliate your mother. He stood. The room waited. I placed my water glass down carefully. The condensation had formed a pale ring beneath it. Then I looked at him. Sit down, Dad. I did not raise my voice. I did not repeat myself. Blaine stared at me for one long second. Then he sat. The chair made the same scraping sound in reverse. For the first time that evening, he seemed to realize what he had done. I was not pleased by it. I simply understood the weight of a fact when it was placed under the right light. I reached into my coat pocket and took out Gideon's brass compass. The metal was cool against my fingertips. Its scratched glass caught the chandelier above us. I set it on top of the folder, beside the facility note and the capacity evaluation. The needle trembled once. Then it settled north. Corinne looked at it and went still. I opened the final tab. The notarized affidavit lay beneath it. 6 pages. Gideon's signature on every page. This is the last thing I am going to read tonight, I said. Then I turned to the marked paragraph. The affidavit was 6 pages long. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, as though it had spent too much time inside a drawer before Rowan placed it in the sealed file. Gideon's signature appeared at the bottom of every page in dark blue ink, pressed hard enough that the letters left a faint impression on the paper beneath them. The notary seal was stamped in deep blue near the final signature line. I held the first page steady with my left hand. The sheet moved once between my fingers. Then it stopped. This affidavit was signed on December 9, 2021, I said. It was notarized the same day. It was retained by Gideon's independent counsel, and it was preserved with the rest of his estate records. Corinne sat completely still across from me. My father had both hands flat on the oak table. Soren had finally lifted his eyes, although he was looking at the affidavit rather than at me. Mireia held the facility note in her lap. Hollis stared at the glass of water in front of him as if it had become unexpectedly complicated. I turned to the marked paragraph. Gideon had not written in legal language. That was the first thing I noticed when I read it alone in Rowan's office. He had written the way he spoke when he wanted to make sure nobody could pretend they misunderstood him. I have watched Corinne Dalloway manage my care the way a person manages a future asset, I read. Her attention increases when someone is looking. Her concern rises when a document is involved. I do not question that she is my daughter. I question whether she remembers that I am her father before I am an estate. My mother made a sound that was almost a laugh. It did not become one. I kept reading. Blaine has asked questions about my accounts that he has no present authority to ask. He may believe those questions are practical. I believe they are rehearsals. The room went quiet again. There are moments when a family does not break because someone says one new thing. It breaks because one person finally reads aloud what everyone else has spent years refusing to name. I turned the page. During my final years, Marin came without announcements and without photographs. She brought me a lamp from my study, a compass I had kept on my desk for decades, and the kind of conversation that does not need an audience. Corinne and Blaine showed up when it could be seen. Marin showed up when it mattered. My mother pushed her chair back. "You cannot use this," she said. "This was private. He wrote that when he was angry. You are taking a private letter and using it to destroy this family." "It is not a private letter," I said. "It is a notarized affidavit preserved in his estate file." "You know exactly what I mean." "I do." Her face flushed beneath the restaurant lighting. "You always knew how to get inside his head," she said. "You made yourself useful. You made him think we were against him." I did not touch the folder. My hands remained on either side of the affidavit. Dr. Bell found that Grandpa understood his finances, his beneficiaries, and his decisions, I said. Rowan Kincaid represented him independently. Lakeshore Haven documented your attempts to limit notifications. The bank documented Dad's calls. Grandpa documented the rest. "You are enjoying this," Blaine said. "No," I replied. "I am finishing it." Mireia lifted one hand to cover her mouth. The small movement was more honest than anything she had said that evening. Her eyes stayed on the page in front of me. She had spent the first hour asking me to remember what family meant. Now she was looking at the date of a facility note written 2 days before Gideon died. Hollis did not say the word contest again. He did not say undue influence. For the first time since I arrived, he had nothing available to contribute. Then Soren spoke. His voice was low enough that I had to lean forward slightly to hear him. "I did not know they kept the funeral from you." My mother turned toward him. "Soren." He kept looking at the table. "I did not," he said again. "I knew they were trying to manage the estate. I knew they wanted everything settled before Marin got involved. But I did not know they did that." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his napkin. I should have asked more questions. Nobody answered him. Not because the sentence fixed anything. It did not. But it was the first sentence anyone in that room had said that did not try to move the blame somewhere else. I closed the affidavit. The sound of the paper meeting the folder was soft. "I am not signing the temporary estate management agreement," I said. Blaine looked toward the 11-page document still lying between us. "You are making a mistake." "No," I said. "I am declining a document drafted to remove my authority from an estate Gideon placed under my authority." Corinne stood. "If you walk out of here, you are choosing lawyers over your own family." I picked up the brass compass and slipped it back into my coat pocket. The metal rested against my palm for 1 second before I let it go. I did not choose lawyers over family, I said. You chose control over him. Her mouth opened, but I continued before she could speak. From this point forward, all communication regarding Gideon's estate goes through Rowan Kincaid. If you decide to file a contest, I will see you in probate court. I stood. Mireia looked as though she wanted to say something. She did not. Soren remained seated, staring at the white tablecloth. Hollis looked toward the frosted glass door, perhaps hoping the restaurant staff would open it and make the room disappear. I gathered the certified copies, leaving the temporary agreement untouched. Then I walked out. The hallway outside the private room was warm and dim. A server passed me carrying a tray of empty glasses. I continued through the lobby, pushed open the front door, and stepped into a thin, cold rain. The parking lot shone under the streetlights. Water gathered in shallow lines along the curb. My shoes made quiet sounds against the pavement as I crossed toward my car. I did not turn around. I had spent enough time standing outside doors that other people believed they controlled. That night, I drove away with Gideon's record in my passenger seat. By Monday morning, my parents had a decision to make. My parents filed the contest 19 days after I walked out of Hawthorne Table. Rowan called me at 8:11 on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk, reviewing a proposed special needs trust for a client whose brother had tried to redirect disability payments through his own account. The facts were different. The language was familiar. Marin, Rowan said, Blaine and Corinne filed this morning. On what grounds? Undue influence and diminished capacity. I wrote both phrases in my notebook. The words looked almost formal on the page. They were not new. They had been building toward them since the day my mother stood behind a half-open door and told me I had not been invited for a reason. Who is representing them? I asked. Denton Rusk. He is based in Lansing. He handles commercial disputes and some probate litigation. Has he reviewed the capacity evaluation? I do not know. He has reviewed their allegations. That distinction was enough. I looked across my office at the brass compass on my bookshelf. The morning light caught the scratched glass face. The needle pointed north, steady as it had been on Gideon's desk, then in his room at Lakeshore Haven, then on the oak table at Hawthorne. What is the filing deadline for our response? I asked. 14 days, but I will have the motion to dismiss ready by Monday. Send me the draft before you file. I already planned to. That was why Gideon had trusted Rowan. He did not treat preparation as an emergency response. He treated it as a form of respect. The petition was 34 pages long. It accused me of isolating Gideon during his final years, manipulating his legal decisions, and taking advantage of documented cognitive decline. It described my visits to Lakeshore Haven as evidence of access. It described my legal profession as evidence of influence. The filing did not mention the independent capacity evaluation. It did not mention that Corinne had requested the evaluation. It did not mention that Gideon had met Dr. Marius Bell alone for 90 minutes and passed every assessment placed in front of him. It did not mention the bank inquiries. It did not mention the facility notes. It did not mention the notarized affidavit. A contest can only survive on what it can prove. Their petition survived on what it hoped nobody would ask for. Rowan's motion to dismiss was 61 pages, with 47 exhibits. He filed it Monday morning at 9:02. The first exhibit was Gideon's 2018 engagement letter with Kincaid, Voss, and Mercer. The second was the October 2021 trust amendment. The third was Dr. Bell's 18-page capacity evaluation. The fourth was Gideon's notarized affidavit. The next exhibits were facility records, contact logs, bank inquiry records, and the March 7th note documenting my mother's effort to remove me from future notifications. Everything was dated. Everything was cross-referenced. Everything had a source. I did not go to the courthouse when the motion was argued. The probate court of Kent County had pale stone walls, hard wooden benches, and a hallway built for people who wanted to stare at each other before hearings. I had spent enough time there to know that a courthouse corridor can become its own kind of theater. My parents wanted an audience. They wanted me outside the courtroom so they could see whether I looked nervous. I stayed at Rowan's office instead. His conference room overlooked the river. Rain moved across the glass in thin streaks. A paralegal brought coffee at 10:05, but neither Rowan nor I touched it. He had appeared at the hearing alone. Not because I was avoiding it. Because I had nothing to prove by sitting 10 feet from my parents, while their lawyer repeated allegations that the documents had already answered. Rowan returned at 11:42. He placed his briefcase on the table and removed his coat. "How did it go?" I asked. He sat down across from me. Judge Velt asked Denton Rusk whether he had reviewed Dr. Bell's capacity evaluation. I waited. Mr. Rusk said he had reviewed the materials provided by his clients. "That is not an answer." "No," Rowan said. Judge Velt noticed. He opened a binder and showed me the hearing notes. Denton had argued that Gideon's age, moved to a senior residence, and my legal training created enough suspicion to justify discovery. Rowan had responded with the timeline. He showed the court that Gideon retained independent counsel before he moved into care. He showed that my mother requested the evaluation she was now implying had never existed. He showed that the evaluator found Gideon fully capable. He showed the affidavit, the bank records, and the facility note. Then Rowan had said one sentence that appeared in his notes with a line beneath it. "The petition asks this court to infer manipulation from a relationship while ignoring the records that explain the relationship." Judge Velt took the matter under advisement. That was all. No dramatic ruling. No raised voices. No one walked out in handcuffs. Courts rarely look like television when they are doing their work correctly. They look like paper, deadlines, and a judge who has read enough to understand when someone is asking for more time because they have no case. That evening, Corinne sent me an email. The subject line was, "Do the decent thing." I opened it at 7:18 p.m. while sitting at my kitchen counter. She wrote that legal victories did not make a person right. She wrote that Gideon would have wanted me to show mercy. She wrote that I should divide the assets in a way that reflects the family who carried him through his final years. She did not mention the funeral. She did not mention the facility note. She did not mention the fact that I had been standing outside her front door while she told me not to make things harder. I saved the email. Then I created a folder titled Post-Notice Conduct. I printed the message and placed it behind Blaine's 612-word email accusing me of manipulation. 2 business days later, Rowan called at 3:36 in the afternoon. I was home. The compass sat beside my laptop. A pot of soup was warming on the stove, and the apartment smelled like tomatoes, thyme, and black pepper. "Marin," Rowan said, "Judge Velt issued the order." I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Read it." There was a sound of paper moving on his end. Then Rowan said, "The testator's capacity and intent are not reasonably disputed. The petition is dismissed without an evidentiary hearing." I did not speak immediately. The order was 2 pages long. When Rowan emailed it to me, I printed it and held the paper between my fingers. It was thinner than Gideon's trust file. The raised court seal pressed against my thumb. The dismissal language was short, direct, and closed to interpretation. Their case had been built on an accusation. My grandfather had built his own records. I set the order beside the compass. Then, for the first time since the certified envelope slid beneath my door, I let out one slow breath. The trust distribution began 12 days after Judge Velt dismissed my parents' first contest. There was no dramatic wire transfer notification with a choir of alerts and a number that changed my life in one bright second. Estate administration does not work that way. Money moves through review periods, tax filings, title confirmations, beneficiary certifications, and signatures that matter because they are supposed to matter. Rowan's office sent me a disbursement schedule on a Monday at 8:46 in the morning. The liquid trust assets, totaling $18,400,000, would transfer in 3 stages. The commercial holdings, valued at $4,300,000, would remain under the Renford Commercial Holdings Trust, with me listed as sole controlling trustee and Rowan's firm handling transition compliance for the first 12 months. I read the schedule at my kitchen table. The same table where the certified envelope had landed 6 weeks after Gideon died. This time, the coffee beside my laptop was hot. I signed the trustee acceptance documents at 11:13 that morning. I reviewed the asset ledger. I reviewed the tax reserve estimate. I reviewed the operating agreements for the holding entities. I instructed Rowan to retain the existing property managers for 90 days while I completed an independent operational review. That was not caution for its own sake. Gideon had built those holdings over 4 decades. The buildings had tenants, maintenance staff, lease obligations, and people whose paychecks had nothing to do with my family's argument. I was not going to treat their work as a prize from a fight I had won. Nell called me 2 days later. Her name appeared on my phone at 4:18 in the afternoon. I was standing in my office doorway, looking at a stack of trustee certifications that had arrived by courier. Outside, the April rain had finally stopped. The parking lot below still reflected the blue-gray sky. "Hello, Nell." "Marin," she said. Her voice caught slightly on my name. "Rowan's office called this morning. They told me the cabin transfer is complete." "It is." They also explained the support trust. "Yes." For several seconds, neither of us said anything. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere on her side of the call. "Your grandfather talked about that cabin," Nell said. "He said he wanted me somewhere quiet after he was gone. He made sure that happened. He did more than that." Her voice became softer. "He made sure I did not have to ask anyone for it." I leaned against the doorframe. Nell had spent 15 years making Gideon's life work. She had known which drawer held the extra keys, which doctor needed a second call, which jacket he wore when the lake wind turned sharp. She had also known when to step back and let him make his own decisions. "He trusted you," I said. "He trusted you too." I looked toward my desk, where the brass compass sat beside a legal pad. "Thank you for calling," I told her. After we ended the call, I stood in the doorway for another minute before returning to my paperwork. 8 weeks after the meeting at Hawthorne Table, Soren called. It was 9:07 on a Sunday night. I was on my couch with a blanket over my legs and a bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. I had spent most of the day reading lease abstracts from the commercial portfolio, then answering emails from 2 property managers who were nervous about whether new ownership meant they would lose their contracts. Soren's name appeared on my screen. I watched it ring once. Then I answered. "Hi." "Hi," he said. His voice was different from the restaurant. Less guarded. No audience around him. "I know you do not have to talk to me," he said. I wanted to say something without Mom and Dad being part of it. I did not fill the silence for him. He took a breath. "I knew they wanted to keep you out." The television across the room played silently. The blue light moved across the wall. "What did you know?" "Before Grandpa died, I heard Mom say you were going to make things difficult if you got involved. Dad said they needed time to get the estate organized before you started asking questions. And you said nothing." I said nothing. He did not try to soften it. "I did not know they were going to hide that he died. I did not know they would keep you from the funeral. But I knew they wanted you out of the way, and I told myself it was not my problem." I set my popcorn bowl on the coffee table. "That is still a decision, Soren." "I know." He was quiet for several seconds. "I am sorry," he said. "I am not calling because I want money. I am not calling because I want you to forgive me tonight. I just needed to say I was wrong." I looked at the window. Rain had started again, light enough that it only showed when headlights passed outside. "I hear your apology," I said. "That is not the same thing as giving you back the place you gave up." "I understand." "I am not ready for a longer conversation." "I understand that too." We ended the call without promises. I did not want to punish Soren. I simply no longer wanted to pay for other people's silence by pretending it had not cost me anything. 6 months later, at 11:48 on a Tuesday night, a notification appeared on my laptop screen. Rowan had forwarded a filing from a different law firm. My parents had filed a second contest. This time, they alleged newly discovered concerns about Gideon's estate planning process. Their new attorney cited vague irregularities and requested an expanded review of the trust administration. The filing was 27 pages long. Rowan's response was 9 pages. Residential judicata. Prior adjudication. No new evidence. The same parties. The same claims. The same estate documents. The same capacity evaluation. The same notarized affidavit. I read the response at my desk while the apartment stayed dark around me except for the pale blue light from the screen. 7 weeks later, Rowan sent the dismissal notice. It was 3 pages long. The judge dismissed the second challenge with prejudice. No further contest could proceed on the same claims without a showing they could not make. The email arrived at 12:14 in the morning. The notification sound was brief and clean. I opened the attached portable document file, read the final paragraph, and saved it in the folder marked litigation. Then I closed the laptop. The compass rested beside it, motionless beneath the kitchen light. Soren's silence had not been harmless. But his apology was the first thing he had done that did not ask me to carry it for him. Once the second contest was dismissed, the inheritance stopped being a case file. It became work. For almost a year, every document connected to Gideon had carried the same weight. Trust schedules, property ledgers, facility notes, court orders. Emails my parents had written because they believed pressure could replace authority. Those records had protected what Gideon wanted. They did not tell me what I should do with it. That part was mine. The first decision I made was not about investment strategy. It was about purpose. I drove to Ann Arbor on a clear Thursday morning in early October. The trees along Interstate 96 had started turning orange and rust-colored, and the air had the clean, dry smell that comes before Michigan settles into winter. Gideon had graduated from the University of Michigan in 1965 before he bought his first small warehouse outside Holland and learned how to turn overlooked parcels into stable businesses. The university's development office had prepared a conference room overlooking the central campus. There were 6 people waiting when I arrived. The dean of the business school, a financial aid director, a representative from the law school, 2 members of the university foundation staff, and a woman named Dr. Lila Hart, who had spent 14 years directing scholarships for first-generation students. They had a presentation ready. I did not need it. I want to establish the Gideon Renford Legal Access Scholarship, I said. It should support first-generation college students studying business law, ethics, public interest law, or financial compliance. Dr. Hart nodded slowly. What kind of funding structure are you considering? An endowed fund, I said. The initial contribution will be $2 million. I want the annual award to cover tuition support, books, housing assistance, and a paid summer placement with a legal clinic or public interest organization. The room changed after that. Not dramatically. Nobody applauded. But people sat straighter. The financial aid director started taking notes more quickly. Gideon would have appreciated that. He never cared much for speeches. He cared about whether something would still be functioning after the person who announced it had left the room. The scholarship charter was 12 pages long. The cover was dark blue leather. Gideon's full name was embossed across the front in gold letters. The certificate paper inside was thick enough to make a soft sound when I turned the pages. It described eligibility requirements, annual reporting standards, conflict of interest rules, and the exact purpose of the fund. I read every line before I signed it. Then I made a second commitment. The legal clinic where I trained during law school had operated for years on grants, volunteer hours, and the determination of staff members who kept answering phones after their office hours ended. It helped older adults draft wills, advance directives, medical powers of attorney, and simple trusts. Many of the clinic's clients arrived because they had received a medical diagnosis, lost a spouse, or realized their adult children had started asking questions about money before asking questions about care. I met the clinic director, Naomi Sayer, in a small office near campus. She had been an elder law attorney for 26 years, and every surface in her office was covered with folders, handwritten notes, and photographs from volunteer events. I want to fund a permanent estate planning program, I told her. Not a one-time workshop. A program that allows people to get documents in place before a family conflict makes those documents necessary. Naomi looked at me for a moment. Why this particular work? I rested my hands on the edge of her desk. Because older people without independent legal guidance can become vulnerable to relatives with a plan. She did not ask me to explain further. She had probably heard versions of my story from clients who did not have a Rowan Kincaid, a notarized affidavit, or a grandfather who understood paper trails. The clinic grant-funded 2 staff attorneys, a part-time social worker, and monthly outreach visits to senior residences across western Michigan. It also paid for translation services and filing fees for clients who could not afford them. That mattered to me. Protection should not depend on whether someone can afford a lawyer before their family decides they need one. A week after the scholarship announcement, I drove to Nell's cabin. It sat near the water outside Saugatuck, tucked behind a narrow line of pines. Gideon had bought the property years earlier as a quiet place to fish, then left it mostly unused after his niece made the uneven trail difficult. Nell had placed a small wooden bench near the porch, and smoke rose from the chimney when I arrived. She opened the door before I knocked. "You brought the cold with you," she said. "I thought Michigan handled that part." She smiled and stepped aside. The cabin smelled like old wood, cedar soap, and tea steeping in a ceramic pot. It did not look borrowed. That was the first thing I noticed. I handed her a framed photograph from the scholarship announcement. Gideon's name was visible behind a podium, and the new scholarship charter rested on a table beneath it. Nell held the frame for a long time. "He would have acted like this was too much attention," she said. "He would have read the charter and asked whether the reporting standards were clear enough." That made her laugh once. She handed me a small envelope before I left. Inside was a card with a narrow gold border, the kind Gideon used to send. The handwriting was Nell's, careful and steady. "Marin, he saw you. You saw him." That was enough. 3 sentences. I folded the card along its existing crease and placed it in my coat pocket. Over the next several months, I kept part of Gideon's commercial portfolio intact. The properties with stable tenants, reliable managers, and long-term community value remained under the trust. I sold selected assets that carried unnecessary maintenance exposure or no longer fit the portfolio's purpose. Every sale required an appraisal, a market review, and written trustee approval. Every reinvestment had a stated reason. I did not send my parents photographs of the scholarship. I did not announce the distribution figures online. I did not use the money to make them feel small. They had already done that work to themselves. Gideon had not left me money to make a point. He had left me the chance to make something useful. And the largest part of his legacy was not the estate itself. It was that he had noticed who showed up when nobody was watching. 1 year after the certified envelope slid beneath my apartment door, I moved my office 3 blocks closer to the Grand River. The space had once belonged to a small accounting firm. It had narrow windows, uneven hardwood floors, and a conference room that looked directly over the water. I replaced the old beige carpet, added built-in shelves for estate files, and kept the walls plain because people who come to discuss death, money, and family do not need decorative distractions. They need clear space. My name was printed in black letters beside the elevator. Marin Dalloway Probate and Trust Law. The brass compass sat between my computer and my desk lamp. It had remained there through every meeting since the move. The metal casing reflected the warm yellow light each evening. The scratched glass face caught the window light in the morning. The needle still pointed north, even when I did not need it to. Beside it stood Nell's card. "Marin, he saw you. You saw him." That was enough. The edges had curved slightly because I had picked it up more times than I could count. One Tuesday afternoon in November, I met with a client named Evelyn March. She was 78, recently widowed, and had 2 adult daughters sitting beside her in the conference room. One daughter took notes. The other kept looking at her phone. Evelyn had a house in Rockford, a retirement account, a modest investment account, and a small cabin her husband had bought 30 years earlier. Nothing about the numbers was extraordinary. The situation was, her daughters had already begun arguing about who would help her manage things. Evelyn sat across from me with both hands folded over her purse. "I do not want them fighting after I am gone," she said. "They will not," the daughter with the phone said quickly. "We just need Mom to set things up fairly." I looked at Evelyn. What do you want? The room went quiet. That was the question people often skipped. They asked what was practical, what was efficient, what made the family comfortable. They forgot the person whose name would be on every page. Evelyn answered carefully. I want my daughters to be treated equally. But I want the cabin to go to my granddaughter. She is the only one who still uses it. I explained the options. A revocable trust. A durable financial power of attorney. A medical directive. A memorandum for personal property. I described the difference between being named as an agent and being given ownership. I described why every major decision needed to be documented while Evelyn was clearly capable of making it. Then I said, a trust is only as strong as the person who understands and protects the intention behind it. The daughter with the phone looked up. Evelyn nodded. By the end of the meeting, she had selected an independent successor trustee and scheduled a second appointment without either daughter present. My assistant printed the engagement letter. Evelyn signed it with a steady hand. After they left, I returned to my desk and looked at the compass. My parents had believed silence meant weakness. They had believed that because I did not argue at the front door, I had accepted being shut out. Because I did not answer every voicemail, I had no answer. Because I came to dinner and sat calmly through their speeches about unity, I would sign the agreement they pushed toward me. They mistook restraint for access. They were not the first people to make that mistake. They were only the people who should have known me best. I did not win because I shouted louder than they did. I did not win because I found a way to make them suffer in public. I did not win because I tried to destroy their lives, take their home, or turn their humiliation into entertainment. I won because Gideon left documents. I read them. I understood what they protected. And I refused to sign anything just to make the people across the table comfortable. That was all. But it was enough. There were consequences for my parents. Their first contest was dismissed without an evidentiary hearing. Their second challenge was dismissed with prejudice 7 weeks later. Each of them received $27,500 under Gideon's estate plan, exactly as the trust summary had stated from the beginning. They lost the authority they had assumed belonged to them. They lost the story they had tried to tell about being the only people who cared for Gideon. They lost the ability to describe me as difficult without explaining why they hid a death, excluded me from a funeral, and asked a facility to remove my name from future notifications. I did not need to explain any of that to their neighbors. The documents had already done it where it mattered. Soren and I spoke occasionally after that. Not often. Not casually. But honestly. He sent a message on my birthday. I answered 2 days later. He asked once whether I had seen the scholarship announcement. I told him I had. He did not ask for pictures, money, or a role in it. That was the first time I believed he understood the difference between wanting access and earning trust. My parents sent no more messages about Gideon's estate. Corinne mailed a card at Christmas with a printed family photo inside. I did not open it for 3 days. When I did, I found no handwritten note, only the same polished image of people standing close together for a camera. I put it in the drawer where I kept documents that no longer required a response. That evening, I stayed late at the office. Outside the window, the Grand River moved through the dark. City lights shook gently on the water. The lamp on my desk cast a soft circle around the compass and Nell's card. I picked up the compass. The brass was warm from the lamp. The glass was still scratched. The needle moved once, then settled. My parents thought I had done nothing because I did not make noise. Gideon never thought that. He knew I was reading. He knew that when the time came, I would know what to do. Calm is not surrender. Sometimes it is simply the moment before the record speaks. And that is what people like my parents never understand. The quiet person in the room may not be giving in. She may simply be reading every line before she decides what comes next.